Okay, welcome, Algebra 2. Another week in my garage learning about math. This week we focus on the discriminant, which is really just one little piece of the quadratic formula we looked at last week. So if you remember last week we talked about the quadratic formula saying any x value in a quadratic formula looks like this: negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. If you did all that work, that was the hard work. Now we're just going to focus on this piece under the square root. So the discriminant is actually just b squared minus 4ac. That's what the discriminant is. Just that piece, not square rooting it, just saying what's b squared minus 4ac. There's three different cases you could get. Either this is going to be positive. If it's positive, you're going to have two real solutions. Real just means on the number line, like 1, 7.2, 8.7, something like that, whatever. You have real numbers, and I'm trying to distinguish between real numbers and imaginary numbers that we already talked about in this class. So if you end up getting 0 for this, then you're going to get one real solution. I can kind of explain how that works in a minute, but if you get a negative value for this b squared minus 4ac, you get a negative value for the discriminant in the quadratic formula, you're going to have two imaginary solutions. A quick lesson on why that is, three different situations here, but this is the lesson. We're going to do some of these in a minute. If we get a positive number underneath the square root, say it's like 5, you'll have negative b plus 5 after you square root it, and then over 2a and negative b minus that positive number. So you're going to get two separate answers. That's kind of what we've been living with. Two real solutions if we get a positive number under here. If this turns out to be 0 and this whole thing cancels out, you have negative b over 2a. There is no plus or minus anymore because it's plus or minus 0. So that's why you're going to end up with just one real solution. It's called a double root. We'll talk about that more hopefully next week. If this part under here ends up being negative, that b squared minus 4ac is like negative 9. We remember that the square root of a negative value, we have to use an I, that imaginary number, when it comes out. It's talking about the square root of negative 1. So when you get a negative value for the discriminant, that means you're taking the square root of a negative number and you end up with imaginary solutions. Plus the imaginary and minus the imaginary, so two imaginary solutions. This worksheet is just simply going to ask you a few times to find the a, b, and c in a quadratic equation, and quadratic equation, and plug them in and find out the value of the discriminant. And then at the end of the worksheet it says, depending on what you get for the value of the discriminant, how many solutions do you have? So I'll do one or two of these with you, and start off with number 1. It's a good place. It looks like this: 6p squared minus 2p minus 3 equals 0. We still have to identify the a, the b, and the c. You remember it's that, and that, right? So a is the 6, b is that negative 2, and c is the negative 3. And I'm just going to plug that into b squared minus 4ac. So the b is negative 2. I need to square that. Use parentheses if you can, because negative 2 times negative 2 is positive 4. Minus 4 times the a value is a 6. And the c value is a negative 3. And that's all I'm doing for number 1, is kind of figuring out what that is. Negative 2 times negative 2 is 4. Negative 4 times 6 is negative 24. Times negative 3 is going to be positive 72. If you need a calculator, feel free to use it. Those two added together is 76. So what's the value of the discriminant for number 1? It's a 76. Since that's a 76 and it's positive, this is going to have two real solutions. You don't need to go that far with number 1 through 6, I think, because it's just asking you to find out what is that b squared minus 4ac. And it's getting the number back. The last few questions on the worksheet say, after you get that, compare it back to this, and if it's a positive number like this is, you would say two real solutions. If it's a 0, they cancel out, you would say one real solution. And if it's a negative number for the discriminant, that means you have a negative square root and you get imaginary solutions. So let's do one of those. How about we do where we get an imaginary solution or two imaginary solutions? Number 7, I believe, does that. It looks like this: 9n squared minus 3n minus 8 equals negative 10. Now, in order to identify A, B, and C, you're going to have to remember that you need to bring that negative 10 over to this side of the equal sign and set the equation equal to 0. So it looks like this: 9n squared minus 3n. If I add 10 and add 10, I get a positive 2 over here. 10 plus negative 8, or 10 minus 8 is that 2. So my A value is 9, my B value is negative 3, and my C value is 2 now. B squared minus 4AC looks like this. It's that negative 3 squared minus 4 times 9 times 2. This is a 9 minus, let's see, negative 36 times 2 is going to be a negative 72. Looks good. And then we're going to do that subtraction. You get a negative 63. That's not the answers I'm looking for. That is the discriminant. The discriminant of this quadratic equation is negative 63. And since that's negative, we have two imaginary solutions. So that's what they want you to do in number 7 through 12, I think, is once you get the discriminant, they want to say how many real or imaginary solutions do you get. Since that's a negative number, you get two imaginary solutions. This is your key. This is the lesson. This is what you need to know. After you find the discriminant, you look at this and say it's either 2 real, 1 real, or 2 imaginary. This would have been 2 real because it's positive. Let's do one more. It's probably going to be one of these zeros if I did this right. Looks like number 8 might do that. So I got a negative 2x squared. I got a minus 8x. And I got a minus 14 equals that negative 6, I believe, right? So I have to bring that negative 6 over here and combine with that negative 14. 2x squared minus 8x. I have to add 6 and add 6, so I get minus 8. And now I have a 0 over there. Now I have my A, my B, and my C. A equals negative 2, B equals negative 8, and C equals negative 8 this time. Plug those into B squared minus 4AC, and I get this negative 8 squared minus 4 times A is negative 2 times C is that negative 8. Sorry about that. Coming down here, 64. Negative 4 times negative 2 is positive 8. Positive 8 times negative 8 is negative 64. Notice that. 64 minus 64 is 0. Whenever I get a 0 as my discriminant, that means I have one real solution. So that's what they're looking for in number 8. Is for you to say, I know by looking at those numbers, A, B, and C, and plugging them into B squared minus 4AC, I end up with a 0. And that gives me one real solution. Basically because I'll get 64 minus 64 under here. That's going to drop out and turn into 0. And you'll be saying plus 0 is one of your answers and minus 0 is the other answer. So that's the same number. 0 is going to drop out of your equation. When that's 0 underneath the square root, that whole part drops out and you're left with negative b over 2a as your answer for what we did last week. You have to do 1 through 12, I believe it is, on your worksheet. 1 through 6 is just like this. Find the discriminant, find the number. And then 7 through 12, I did 7 and 8. It says, after you find the discriminant, tell me, does that mean you have 2 real, 1 real, or 2 imaginary solutions? And then that will be your answer for those. Do as much as you can. Show as much work as you can, right? So you can't just tell me that or tell me that or tell me that. You got to do all this work in your notebook. And I'm going to ask you to see that on Thursday in your webcam, or take a picture of it and send it to me. And you get credit for that. Show up on Thursday. I believe it's going to be 12 noon on Thursday for our video chat and hangouts. So be there, show me your work, get 100. We only have 4 or 5 weeks left in school. If you want to get a decent grade for the 4th market period, you have to show up. If you don't show up, you got a 0. If you don't email us to me, you got a 0 for that assignment. So it's very easy to get your credit for these lessons. Watch the video, do the worksheet, and come on Thursday and show me you did it. I'll see you then. I hope you all come and have a great day. Stay safe.